Let's talk to Baroness Claire Fox, who, of course, is a former Brexit Party MEP. Claire, thanks for joining me.
Good to be with you.
On today of all days, why are you not wearing a Union Jack dress?
I've never worn a Union Jack dress, and I'm not going to start now. But I was there in the crowd celebrating, but in a rather more modest attire.
Yes, I was sure. Very sensible. So, I mean, a lot of things to ask you, but first of all, I don't know if you've seen Sadiq Khan's tweet this morning. He has to get in on the act with these kind of sharp elbows, doesn't he? He's very Starmer-esque, actually, in terms of his penchant for wanting to be seen to be a kind of an international statesman, a statesman on the international stage. So he couldn't help himself, could he, Keir Starmer, but say today that on the 5th anniversary of Brexit, I want all European Londoners to know that you are welcome and wanted in our city. Well, look, frankly, that's obvious. Anyone that's here is fine. Brexit wasn't about deporting anybody, so I'm not quite sure what Sadiq Khan's inference there is, but I think one of the things he's trying to get at is, of course, that he absolutely covets the principle of free movement, refugees welcome no matter what, and so on. What do you make of what Sadiq Khan's involvement in this is? I mean, as London Mayor, should he kind of butt out of such things?
Well, he should butt out of a lot of things, and he should make London work, but he's very good at tweeting and less good at making London a place that we all want to live in, yes, European or otherwise. I mean, very good point, though, that the point is that this was not... I've got nothing against Europeans. That's a ridiculous notion.
I'm married to one, so I definitely haven't.
Very good. And the argument was always posed that anyone who voted Brexit was a xenophobe, who hated Europe, hated Europeans. Actually, no, it was a rejection of the EU, and it was an assertion of sovereignty, as you've already been discussing on the programme.
Yeah.
And in fact, that sense of a nation state wanting to control its borders, control its laws and so on, well, if you look over on the continent at what's happening within the EU now, within the countries within the EU, it's all gone a bit Brexity.
Well, look at Germany, look at Greece, look at Italy. I mean, it's an absolute travesty. And that's a combination of the woke liberal left view of not just the EU, of course, but the likes of Macron and the likes of Angela Merkel as she was. I mean, yes, that what a failed experiment.
Well, the point is that lots of European citizens, our fellow citizens in different European countries, are now getting involved in a different kind of populist upsurge. A lot of Euroscepticism around. Even the most ardent EU bureaucrat types are saying, oh my God, we've lost control of the borders. We're going to have to do border controls. You know, the whole promise of the Schengen deal and passportless freedom of movement that they've claimed that they believe in is now something of stuck in the past, because there's now demands for border controls on land border controls in Germany and so on. So all I'm saying is that there's a mythology about this wonderful EU that actually many citizens of EU nation states don't share.
Well, and the governments of those countries.
Yeah.
I mean, the likes of Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and now, very, very recently, Italy in particular and Germany, as governments are turning their back on EU diktat on immigration, going to war really with the EU and sticking their fingers up at the auspices of the ECHR that they also are subjected to. So, A, interesting. B, why don't we do that?
Well, on the ECHR, it is a different question. I'm very sympathetic to your point about reviewing whether we should be anything to do with it. But I don't think the reason why Brexit hasn't worked is just because of the ECHR. I mean, I actually had a lot of sympathy with the caller just before the news, Andrew, who said that one of the tragedies that occurred after the 2016 referendum vote, which was, after all, one of the most exhilarating and exciting moments for democracy, was that so many voters in the country suddenly realised that when they actually won an election, won a referendum against all the odds,
it would be enacted.
That the political class refused to implement it for so long, and that disillusioned many people about the nature of democracy itself.
And please carry on. Sorry.
Well, I still maintain that what Brexit was all about was it unleashed the genie out of the bottle in terms of people understanding more why democratic control of society is so important. But we also came into clash with those people who use the EU, people who run the UK, use the EU as an excuse for ring fencing off so much decision making from the electorate. You know, they'd sort of say, oh, it's Brussels made us do it. Yeah. And when given the opportunity to make our own laws, most of the establishment said, well, we don't want that. We don't want you plebs involved in all this sort of stuff.
Well, when you say mandarins, Claire, do we also mean activist civil servants that have their own agendas over and above their political masters that seem to get their own way? I mean, I think that was very, very evident indeed in terms of the fact that it took 4 years then to ultimately exit, despite there being a very, very clear mandate. But does it also tell us that given that the vote was as it was, and I think we had someone saying earlier on that the majority, 70% of Labour constituencies voted to leave, but the vast, vast majority of Labour MPs voted to remain. I mean, talk about a disjointed kind of a disconnect between those that are elected and those that they are elected to represent.
Well, there was a catastrophic shake-up of the two-party electoral system and the Labour Party's betrayal of the red wall votes. It wasn't just that Labour MPs voted Remain and their constituents voted to leave. It was that they actually were accused of being racist, backward, ignorant, ill-informed, you know, won over by the side of a slogan on the side of a bus, all of this kind of insulting stuff. Yeah. Meant that many people who had voted Labour for generations, you know, in their families, started to look around. And of course, I got elected as an MEP in the start of that political realignment when the Brexit Party set up temporarily for those European elections, swept the board, and then we saw a new realignment when Boris Johnson was elected, often with the support of many of those red wall seats. And of course, he then betrayed the whole issue. So we're still in the middle of it. You know, Brexit is not, it was the start of a democratic shake-up, and goodness knows, we're still trying to see it through.
We're still turning it upside down and shaking it. But so do you believe, first of all, that we haven't Brexited?
Yeah, we've Brexited, but, you know, technically you can Brexit, but it's just that Brexit wasn't a technical question, right? I mean, I agreed with somebody who said, first of all, there's the Northern Ireland question. Yeah. But we also know that seeing Brexit as an opportunity to reorganise British politics was never taken by anyone in control, by any politicians.
Well, that's because most of them didn't want to enact it, yeah.
Yeah, the aspirations and the notion that ordinary people should have a say in the future and in their own lives has been swept to one side by subsequent governments, and I'm afraid of all shades.
And Claire, Nigel Farage saying in a video over the last few hours that he is vowing to properly deliver Brexit. What do you think he means by that, and can he?
Well, I certainly think that I would really admire somebody who tried. You know, I mean, that would be a start. I don't know whether Nigel Farage can do it, but I think
Well, if you had a Brexit Party majority behind him, I mean, look at the polls. I mean, the Brexit Party are now leading. Pollsters saying that if there were an election tomorrow, there'd be reform. There would be 180 seats to the Reform Party if there was an election tomorrow.
The truth of the matter is that the upsurge of support for reform is an indication of what I was more broadly talking about, which is that the promise and aspiration of Brexit for a new realigned political agreement arrangement has not been fulfilled. And I think the support for reform is an indication that people still aspire to that. They still want to be taken seriously. They still believe that politics can be changed for good, and we haven't seen that. So in that sense, a lot of hopes rest with Nigel Farage on reform at the present time, and I have got every sympathy with that. I'm not a Reform Party member.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, do you have sympathy insofar as being tempted to join reform?
Well, I'm very reluctant to join any political party. I've got the privilege, and I do understand that's what it is. I've been in the House of Lords, and I'm a non-affiliated peer, and that's the way it goes. But when it comes to the mainstream parties, I think they both deserve bloody noses, and I'm hoping that reform happens to be the vehicle through which that could happen. And therefore, in that sense, I hope that they continue to gain the support of millions of people, which they seem to be doing at the present time.
So you feel the only way to get rid of, as some people are terming it, the uni party, who of course have both let us down for decades and decades, is by way of, I guess, a political revolution which only the Reform Party can bring about?
Well, we've begun to see it's not the Reform Party bring about, the voters bring it about by making a decision about who they think can shake things up. Yeah. And at the moment, reform is that vehicle, and all, you know, or part of them. I mean, I heard your interview with Paul Embry earlier, and I suppose I'm one of those lefties as well that was
a sensible lefty.
A lefty Brexiteer. I don't know about sensible. I've never been sensible in my life.
Good.
But anyway, on the other hand, I'm one of those kind of people who come from the left. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think those kind of left-right labels don't really work. But what I do think is important is that the Labour Party, it doesn't stand any chance, it seems to me, of retaining the loyalty of even the people who've voted in sparse numbers to give them this huge majority they've got now. And it's not because of Brexit, but something of the spirit of Brexit we need to get our head round, which was, it was people saying, we want a say in politics. You know, can't just keep ignoring us and patronising us. And we have seen since Labour have got elected, whether it's over the grooming rape gangs or whether it's over the Southport issue or the riots or any of this, every time people in the political class talk to ordinary voters in this country, they talk down to them.
So you
talk
think Brexit,
to them as though they're stupid.
So Brexit, Claire, you think Brexit was as much about a general political bloody nose as it was about the EU? Because the demand for sovereignty, which was, you know, perfectly reasonable, people did understand that the EU was used to stop voters in this country having any say. As an excuse. As an excuse. Yeah, but also, but I think the point is also that because we've had decades of politicians being ever more distant from the electorate, it was a means of saying, look, you as the political elite, David Cameron included, may not want to see Brexit, but we are going to send you a message that we're actually in control here as the voter, as the electorate.
Yeah,
but that hasn't worked because we've now got a Labour government, and I just want to, before we go to a break, I want to ask you a quick question about what you think about Keir Starmer, a Labour government that's even more out of touch with the electorate.
No, it hasn't worked, but the aspiration hasn't gone away. And Labour are going to suffer the consequences of that. And that's why Reform are doing so well in the polls, it seems to me. People are still saying... So. Yeah, so I when you say it didn't work, the point about it is that it was the start of a democratic revolution. You were talking about, just on the immigration issue, what people were saying was we need to control the borders. I don't know if you saw that interview with Priti Patel yesterday.
I did. We're going to be talking about it later. I mean, she's basically acquiesced and said, no, actually, the 1.2 million on my watch were fine. They were the brightest and the best, Claire. The brightest and the best.
But she basically made the point, oh, no, what people didn't want was just the EU version of freedom of movement. But we chose to interpret that by saying, yes, we now do control our borders. She at least admitted it. They controlled a huge increase in immigration. Yeah. But then she actually said people should be thanking us. I know. And it was so disingenuous.
When I talk about this a little later on, you might want to ring in and get involved. Let's just talk very, very quickly, because I've got to go to a break in a second, but I'd love your take on Keir Starmer. Do you think he's going to try and take us back into the EU by stealth? And do you think he's going to use an EU referendum as a platform in the next election?
That seems unlikely to me.
He'd be mad.
I think that he'd be mad. So he is mad, but I think that would be unlikely. I think, however, that the point is that they imagine that the EU can solve lots of Britain's economic problems. Firstly, people didn't vote for Brexit for economic reasons. Secondly, Britain's economic problems and the problems of growth are not going to be resolved by having a closer alignment with the EU, who themselves are in economic meltdown. No,
we know that, but Starmer, because he wants to be seen as this world statesman on the stage of the planet, I mean, you know, and obviously he's very, very well rehearsed and well known penchant for the EU. I mean, how is he going to be able to contain himself in terms of his temptation now that he's in power and he's got 4 years left to go? How is he not going to try and take us back into the EU in all but name? He's bound to try to do that.
I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is he imagines that economic realignment will lead to an increase in, you know, economic growth in this country. I'm saying it's a false promise. You're absolutely right. He feels far more comfortable talking to EU bureaucrats than he does talking to ordinary British workers.
Well, but particularly people in Southport, and of course, yes, not forgetting that he spent 19 seconds there. But look, just very quickly, the last thing we want to do is align now with the French and German economies, because I don't know if anyone's noticed.
That was what I was saying. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, France is in shrinkage, Germany shrinking. Yeah, exactly. Look, Claire, we've got to go. I've got to take a break, but I could talk to you all day as ever. So look, thank you again very, very much indeed for joining us. That's Claire Fox, former Brexit Party MEP and independent peer. Independent. There you go. Balance.